Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Beruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Chaf Zayin, Amud Bet, 2 lines. We're going to go back to start from the beginning of the story, 2 lines up from the beginning of the wide lines. Tanu Rabbanan, today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, for Joanna Bat Rebekah, for Nisim ben Miriam, and especially dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, that should have full Refuah Shelema, full recovery, Bezat Hashem. Amen. Amen. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, Dayan family, Cohen family. It should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot, Bezat Hashem. Amen. So we started a lot of different halachic sugyas, the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, aka Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, and we mentioned one of the shitas that he had halachically would be the question that the Gemara brought, the Gabe, putting something on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, on top of the schach. That's the story of the Gemara, that Rabbi Eliezer was hosted by Yochanan ben Rabbi Eli in the city of Kesari or Kesarin, and the sun was rising up and heating up the place, and Yochanan ben Rabbi Eli wanted to know if I could put a sardine, spread some cloth on top of the schach of the sukkah, the question of adding to an ohel arai. And Rabbi Eliezer, instead of answering the question, he deflected the question. He started saying, well, you know, there was no shevet from Klal Yisrael that didn't end up having one of the shoftim coming from them. The shoftim, the leaders of Klal Yisrael from the time of Yehoshua until the first king, Shaul HaMelech, were called shoftim, and Rashi goes through what we know, what we don't know, from which one of the shoftim came from what shevet, and that's what he told him. He completely changed the subject. A few hours later, the sun is coming closer to the middle of the sukkah, and he asks again, he says, Chacham, mutar, asur. He deflects again, he says, you know, there was no shevet from Klal Yisrael that didn't have a Navi. And Yehuda and Binyamin, who didn't have Naviim, at least they had a king, Al-Pi Navi, completely changed the subject. At some point, the sun comes to the feet of Rabbi Eliezer, and Yochanan Rabbi Eli just takes the sardine, puts it on top of the sukkah. He just does it. He held that it was mutar, at least beshat sar, like this. And what Rabbi Eliezer does next is shocking. He takes his talit, puts it on his back, and he leaves the sukkah. And Mara says, not because he wanted to push him away, he didn't want to teach him Torah, or he was upset with him. It's because Rabbi Eliezer had a hanhaga that he never said a psak if he directly didn't hear it from his rabbis. That's what the Gemara says. Le'olam, he never said anything that he didn't directly hear from his Rebbe. Now we have a question here that Yochanan ben Rabbi Eli is asking him, Chacham, is this Mosif al Ohel Arai? Is this adding to the binyan, or is it not? Asur or mutar? Now before we get there, the Gemara, the main primary reason that the Gemara brings this is the different shita of Rabbi Eliezer that we mentioned before. You remember we mentioned that Rabbi Eliezer held that you have to have the same sukkah throughout the 7 days of Chag. So if he's staying in the sukkah of Yochanan Rabbi Eli, and then for some reason he's not happy with the situation and he gets out. By the way, this was just not for people to say that he passed in his mutar or asur. That's why he left. But where is he leaving to? He has to stay in the same sukkah for 7 days. So just, you're not happy, too bad, swallow it. You have to sit here for the next 7 days. According to his own shita, you have to be in the same sukkah. So Gemara asks, says, Hechi Avid Hachi. This is now 5 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. How did Rabbi Eliezer get to leave the sukkah and go somewhere else? Rabbi Eliezer himself is the one that says he can't leave the sukkah to a different sukkah. The Gemara says no. Regel achar, he said, who said he was Chag HaSukkot? Yeah, he's sitting in the sukkah, but you could sit in the sukkah during the course of the year also. If I would add in parentheses, of course, if he is the Chag HaSukkot, you're not going to put a sardine on top of the sukkah, or be pasul, right? So it's not really Chag HaSukkah. Well, unless it's for designer, we learned that in the first parak. But certainly, it doesn't have to be Chag HaSukkot. It was a gazebo outside. It was nice weather, beautiful sunny day. They were outside, hanging out in the sukkah. Mara says, wait a second. What is he doing in Yochanan Rabbi Eli's sukkah? Another shit. This is very restrictive. Rabbi Eliezer's shitas, according to halakha, it's very restrictive. He is the one that says you're not allowed to go to anybody else's house. You shouldn't. You remember how we learned? Rabbi Eliezer said, "Meshabeach ani et hatzlanin." The only good thing about being lazy is don't be lazy when it comes to going to other people's houses for Yom Tov. So how can you tell me it was a different Yom Tov? Like Rashi says it was Shavuot, and then he says it was Regel Acher, because Shavuot at the time is hot and so on. So it says the Gemara, how did he go out for Shavuot, for a different Yom Tov, from his household? He's the one that says nobody should be going out from their homes, from their family, leaving their family behind, going somewhere else. So says the Gemara, Shabbat Havai. No, it was not a regel, it was Shabbat. This is a primarily Hilchot Shabbat question. He was staying on Shabbat with Yochanan, Rabbi Eli, and they were having a nice time outside in the sukkah, and it's a question on Shabbat, can I add an ohel arai? And he said he didn't answer it, because he didn't know exactly what his Rebbeim would say, and therefore he kept quiet. So the Gemara says, fine, but we know what Rabbi Eliezer would have held in this situation, because we have a very similar, almost identical psak from none other than Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol himself. What is the question? V'tifshot le-medideh. Let us give an answer from Rabbi Eliezer himself in a different psak that he had given, and we should infer and deduce from that psak that this case would be asur. That putting a sardine, spreading a cloth on top of the sukkah would be indeed asur, because it's adding to the building, is adding to an ohel arai. What is that psak of Rabbi Eliezer? Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah. Pekak hachalon, a plug of a window. Now, nowadays we're used to windows and glass and shades and blinds. Back in the day, there was none of these things. It was a hole in the wall. That was the chalon. And if you didn't want it to be open, you had a wooden piece made, custom made for that piece. You just stick it in, and that would be closing it from not just light, but closing up the hole. That's the pekak chalon. So can you put back the pekak of the chalon on Shabbat? Right, I want to go to sleep on Friday night. Pekak chalon, mutar or asur? So the Mishnah says that Rabbi Eliezer himself, that is the subject of our discussion, is the one that says, Bizman shekashur v'talui pokekin bo. If it is chained to the wall, the fancier ones, they would have a rope, a chain attached to this wooden piece. The other end of it would be attached to the wall. So you would take it off, and it would be hanging not on the floor, it would be hanging on the wall. The short chain, short rope, and then when you wanted to put it back, you will put it back inside the hole, which was called the chalon. So it says Rabbi Eliezer, if you have an attachment to the wall already, and it's a short attachment that it doesn't end up on the floor, it's hanging on the wall when it's not on, then it's mutar. Ve'im lav en pokekimbo. But if not, if it's not attached, or the attachment is too long and it's sitting up, then it's not mutar. That's what Rabbi Eliezer Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, and they say ben kach uben kach pokekin bo. In either case, you could close it up, even if it's not attached and it's not long, it will be still mutar. This is a sugya that's mentioned more than once in Masechet Shabbat, starting from the Mishnah there in Daf Kuf Chav Hey. And the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer would suggest that anything short of being attached like that to the wall should be asur. So if I want to put the sardine over here, it should be asur. That would be the suggestion of the Gemara, that I should know how to infer from a different psak of Rabbi Eliezer what the case should be halachically in adding a sardine on top of the schach of the Sukkah and Shabbat. Mar says not quite, because there is a major difference between the two cases. Whereas in the case of Shabbat, if you don't have any attachment of a rope or of a chain that is nicely indicating that this is a door that is temporary, you put it out, you put it in. If you don't have any of that, you just take this piece of wood and stick it inside the wall, and it's exactly the size. You will be mebatel this piece of the wood there if you want to not use this window anymore. For what? You stick it in. Nobody knows that this is like a window. It will look like the government came and boarded your house, right? And that's like an addition to it's a item that would be mitbatel. You would leave it there, nullify it to the wall, and that would be the end of it. But a sardine, when you spread a nice, beautiful piece of cloth on top of your schach, of course you're going to take it. It's a temporary thing. You put it there when it's sun, you take it off when the sun goes. And therefore, you may have said that even according to Rabbi Eliezer himself, this would be mutar. Therefore, you cannot deduce from the psak in Masechet Shabbat for the case in Masechet Sukkah. And that the Gemara says, Hatam hu demebatel, there will be asur because he would be nullifying this piece of wood inside the cavity of the window. Aval hachat delo mebatel lo, and here that you are not nullifying, you're definitely going to take that sardine off the schach when the sun goes. Therefore, it may have been mutar, and therefore we don't know how to be poshet. Be that as it may, Rabbi Eliezer left the sukkah to indicate that he did not want to paskin one way or another when it came to this question. Now, in line with this, that Rabbi Eliezer never said things that he didn't directly hear from his Rebbe, the Gemara brings another story. Tanu Rabbanan, this is a daf of Gemara filled with unbelievable, each one of these could be talked about for a long time. Amazing rate of stories about Rabbi Eliezer and his Rebbeim, as we'll have. Masechet Rabbi Eliezer shavat b'Galil ha'elyon. Rabbi Eliezer spent a Shabbat in Galil ha'elyon, and of course, when you have a Talmid Chacham in your midst, is bal tashchit if you don't ask him questions, right? So people came, and they put an array of questions in front of him, right? So they asked him, Sha'alu shloshim halachot be'ilchot sukkah. 30 questions, complicated questions in Ilchot Sukkah. 12 amar lahem shamati, 18 amar lahem lo shamati. On 12 of them, he said, the halacha, he said, this is what my Rebbe said. Well, I heard this from this Rebbe, I heard that from that Rebbe. And on 18 of them, he said, I have not heard this from my Rebbeim. So he didn't answer the question. And there are those, Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda says it was the other way around. On 18 of them he answered and he said, Shamati. On 12 of them he said, I did not hear this direct case from my Rebbe. And people told him, they said, Chacham, Kol devarecha eno ela mipi hashmuah. Everything that you say is mipi hashmuah, that you learned it from somebody directly. You don't say your own things. So says Rabbi Eliezer to them, his kaktuni lomar davar shelo shamati mipi rabotai. Now you forced me to say something that I have not directly heard from my Rebbe, and that's talking about myself, right? So let me tell you what I do. And says Rabbi Eliezer, Miyamai, never in my life. Kedamani, lo kedamani adam bebet midrash. I was never the second person in the Bet Midrash. Right? Hashtag Amud Yomi in the morning, right? Who's coming first? He was always the first person. Can you imagine? To always be the first person, you have to be like an hour and a half before everyone else, because sometimes a person can't fall asleep and it comes an hour early. Like, that's how it works. And during the course of he had a long life. During the course of a long life, and you're every day in the Bet Midrash, to never be the second person, he was there way before anyone else. Velo yashanti bebet midrash lo shnat keva v'lo shnat arai. I never slept in the Bet Midrash, not a shnat keva and not even a shnat arai. Now, shnat keva, the Gemara says in Masechet Sanhedrin, daf Ayin Aleph, if a person sleeps in the Bet Midrash, Keraim, the Gemara is darshaning a pasuk, Keraim talbish numa, kol hayashen bebet midrash, Torato naaset keraim keraim. If you sleep in the Bet Midrash, your Torah turns into shreds, right? You'll never be matzliach in learning. So that's about Shenat Arai. So he says, I never slept even Shenat Keva. He says, I never slept even Shenat Arai. Even a temporary putting my head down for 5, I never did. I was awake, ready to learn and ready to run with everything that came in the Bet Midrash. I never dozed off in the Bet Midrash. So I was the earliest person that came by far. I never dozed off. Velo hinachti adam bebet midrash v'yatzati. And not only I was always the first person, never in my career anybody left the Bet Midrash after me. I was the one that turned the light on. I was the one that turned the light off. No one was before me ever. No one was after me ever in the Bet Midrash. Listen to that, right? Now, there's a theme here in the things that he's saying, which is discussed in a second. Velo sachti sichat chulin, and I never spoke idle talk. Velo amarti davar shelo shamati mipi rabbi meolam, and I never said anything that I didn't directly hear from my Rebbe ever. So now, in a moment, we will see that these are not the only hanhagot that Rabbi Eliezer had. Rabbi Eliezer had way more than this, as we're going to discuss. So why is he saying these things to the people in Galila Elyon? Because this is a theme of intellectual completion and honesty that he is telling them. He says, look, you may tell me that I missed something from my Rebbe. He said something and I wasn't there. I was always there. I was the first one by far. I was the last one always. I never slept to say, you were sleeping and the Rebbe said this. No such a thing. I never dozed off. I never went to sleep. I never put my head down. I never spoke Sicha B'Telah to say that, oh, maybe Rebbe was talking about it and I was schmoozing, giggling with the next guy next. Never. It never happened. I'm dedicated to absorbing everything that was ever said by my Rebbeim, and I don't deviate from what they say ever. So all the things that he told them is the reason why his words are complete Kabbalah from his Rebbeim, just like you copied and pasted the Torah of the Rebbeim to Rabbi Eliezer. Says,
who was his main Rebbe?
So we'll see that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of his main Rebbeim. This is the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot as well, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 main Talmidim, and he would count out the Shevach of each one of them, and when he got to Rabbi Eliezer also, according to one, was the greatest of all of them. Right? It's the greatest of all. It says if you put all the Chachmei Israel on one side of the scale, and you put Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus on the other side, he tips the scale in front of everybody else. Right? He was a borsud she'eno ma'abed tipa. He was like a sealed container that never ever lost a drop of water. He never forgot a thing. Now, it's a sad story because, well, there's 2 things. One is we had in Masechet Brachot Daf Kafchet, speaking about Daf Kafchet over here in Masechet Sukkah, so we'll do a Gezerah Shava Kafchet, right? We learned over there that when Chachamim were upset with Rabban Gamliel because of the humiliating experience that he had with Rabbi Yehoshua, which was the main peer of Rabbi Eliezer, they said, okay, we are going to give him an early retirement, right? So who are we going to put up there? We can't do Rabbi Yehoshua because he's the Bal Davar. He's like, that's very hurtful. That because of Rabbi Yehoshua, you're firing him, you put Rabbi Yehoshua instead of him. They can't do that. Rabbi Akiva doesn't have enough zchuyot because his father, by the way, if you didn't know, some people think he was a descendant of Gerim, or he himself was a Ger. None of it is correct. His father, Akiva ben Yosef, his father was a Ger Tzedek, right? So he doesn't have, zchut avot. He may die or drop dead. Something's going to happen to him. If you heard Rabban Gamliel, who knows what's going to happen to him if you don't have zchut avot? They end up putting up the 18-year-old, or different girsah, 13, 16-year-old, 15-year-old. According to our girsah, 18-year-old Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah as the Nasi. Right? You all remember that story. It's not something that you forget. It's also in Haggadah Shel Pesach. The question is, why didn't they say Rabbi Eliezer ben Achorkenes? He's there. He's the main peer of Rabbi Yehoshua. Why not him? Now, the simple reason for that is that Rabbi Eliezer, at some point in his life, even though that he was the Talmid of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he veered off and he became one of the Talmidim of Bet Shammai. He gravitated towards the Bet Shammai, and there will never be appointing someone as the Nasi, with the Shoshelet of Hillel and so on, which is like Bet Hillel, primary Bet Hillel chain of command. So they would never put anybody that's from Bet Shammai. The halacha is not like Bet Shammai, like the Gemara says in Yevamot Daf Yud Gimal, that Bat Kol came out and said halacha ke Bet Shammai. They would never put someone like Bet Shammai. And that's because he never said anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbeim, right? Going back to your question of who the Rebbeim were, therefore they would not put him as a primary posek and the leader of the generation as the Nasi, right? So that's one of the reasons. And the sad part of it is that, unfortunately, because of another encounter that we also discussed another time earlier on, he was actually also put in cherem for the story that we learned in Masechet Baba Metzia and Daf Nuntet Amud Aleph, known as the Tanur Shel Achnai, that he had a debate with the Chachamim, and he very vehemently disagreed with them about the halacha in halachot of tum'ah v'tahara regarding a klicheres, a tanur, a oven that's made out of clay, and it became tameh. So the Torah says if it breaks, klicheres, if you break it, then it becomes tahor. You could use the broken pieces. Right? Now the follow-up question would be, what if I now reconstruct it? I attach the rings, I cut it to rings. Now it's tahor. Now I reconstruct the rings together, make a tanur. Tahor or tameh? So Rabbi Eliezer held it's tahor. His friends, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, and the other ones, but primarily Rabbi Yehoshua, held that it's tameh. And they had a bloody debate. And he brought many, many proofs to his name. He did not accept it because at the end of the day, Yachil Rabim Alachak Rabim, and he was supposed to accept the psak of the Rabbim. He didn't. Rabbi Eliezer was a very specific person. We spoke about this in Masechet Ta'anit, right? When him and Rabbi Akiva, they both davened in a drought that was causing famine and was devastating the community. And Rabbi Eliezer, our Rabbi Eliezer davened 24 tefillot, nothing happened. Rabbi Akiva was his Talmid. He goes there, he says, Avinu Malkenu, En lanu melech elata. Avinu Malkenu rahem alenu, boom. Clouds start pouring cats and dogs, and everyone starts saying, oh, I guess Rabbi Akiva is bigger than him. A bat kol comes out and says, Lo mi peneh shezeh gadol mizeh. Not because Rabbi Eliezer is not as great as Rabbi Akiva, but because Rabbi Akiva is very easygoing. He's very flexible. He's ma'avir al midotav. He's not exacting. Rabbi Eliezer is more specific in personality. So therefore, when you need Rahamesh Shamayim, when you want Hashem not to be exacting with the people, you need somebody that's like that to stand by the Amud, and that's why he was answered and he wasn't. And you find the sad story, the end of the sad story in Masechet Succah, where the Gemara discusses the last moments of Rabbi Eliezer's life, when all of his Talmidim, knowing that he's going, they came to him. They sat. He was still in Cherem. He died in Cherem, and they sat away from him, not to transgress the Cherem, but they're around him, and they're talking. And he says to his Talmidim, he says, "You did not come to learn by me enough. I had so much." And he says some difficult words to them. Rabbi Akiva says, "Me too." He says, "You specifically, because I know how much Torah, I'm like a Sefer Torah that is now closed and burning and is never going to be revealed, all the things that I knew, how much I had to teach." Imagine a person with that capacity that never forgot a thing in his life. And he says, no one learned this from me. There was no one there for me to give all the amazing level of the Torah that I had. And you, because you were mitrashel, you did not take advantage of being able to learn from someone that you could have learned from, you should have learned from, and you didn't, you will be punished. And that was speaking, he was speaking about the end of Rabbi Akiva, how Rabbi Akiva is going to pass away, which already we know from the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, the end of Masechet Brachot, how the end of Rabbi Akiva was. But again, that's like coming to a full circle of Rabbi Eliezer. But here is one of that customs that he had, the hanhagot that Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol had, that he never said a thing that was not directly like Moshe Sinai. He was codifying what he heard from his Rebbeim in its totality without missing a detail. And that's what he said, "I'm not going to comment." When he had the story with Yochanan and Rabbi Eli, he just got up and left the sukkah because he didn't want chas v'shalom people to think that he sided with one way or another, because he never said anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. So says the Gemara, Amru alav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, you want to know more of the hanhagot of Rabbi Eliezer? Here it is. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the Nasi, they said on Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Miyamav lo sach sichat chulin. He never spoke idle talk in his life. Right? Obviously, some of these things, you have to say that it was from the time that he started, because we know that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lived a tremendously blessed long life of 120 years. And for the first 40 years of his life, he was actually a businessman. For all those of you that you're 40 and you have aspirations of becoming the Nasi, so here it is. He started at 40 and he still made it. He still made it over there. Says the Gemara, he never spoke idle talk. Velo halach dalet amot belo Torah ubelo tefillin. He never walked 4 amot without Torah or without tefillin. Right? Now, so this is obviously in Kipshuto, you would learn that the Gemara Masechet Menachot of Yutet has a discussion whether night is time for tefillin, is not time for tefillin. Perhaps we paskin that we don't put on tefillin, even though that is zman tefillin. So we would say, well, maybe he held that Laila is zman tefillin, that he never walked. But the pashtut of this is that either or. He never walked without being attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, either saying Torah, learning Torah, or at least having tefillin. Really, the way you know this is from the Rambam. Rambam in Chot Tefillin, Perek Hey, I think, Perek Dalet, I believe it is, Halacha Kaf Hey. The Rambam there says that Amru alav al Rav Talmid Rabbeinu HaKadosh. By the way, once you're saying this, the Kesef Mishneh Maran over there writes, so I have no idea where Rambam gets this. And he quotes our Gemara. He says, Ayin in Sukkah Daf Kafchet, that they said this about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He doesn't say that the same thing is applicable to Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll see. But it says they said this about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Where do we see this about Rav? I have no idea. As of right now, I have not found a makor for this. Rambam says Maran Bet Yosef in his Kesef Mishneh, but he says, Rambam writes there, says, Amru alav al Rav, But it's a bigger question, really, because when we have the Asara Mili de Chasidut Rav, the top 10 things of Chasidut that Rav used to do, this is not one of them, right? They never. So it's a question. We'll maybe get tomorrow to discuss this a little more. But nevertheless, Rambam says they said on Rav, the Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, that he never walked 4 amot without having either being busy with learning Torah, either having that or having tzitzit or tefillin. That's what he says, right? So you see, it's or. It's not that he never walked without Torah and tefillin combined. So therefore, you don't have to deal with this whole night thing. It could be that at night he didn't have tefillin, but he had Torah. He was always busy learning. He was always, in middle of kaching and learning and thinking of Torah. Out of time, and no one ever came before him to the Bet Midrash. He never slept in the Bet Midrash. You see the very similar things to what Rabbi Eliezer had. He never thought of Torah in dirty alleyways. Now this, you have to discuss this really based on the Gemara in Masechet Brachot. It's a discussion over there in Daf Kaf Dalit. Whether or not it's mutar to think hirhur, not saying the Torah, but just thinking of Torah, where you have mavuotam and tunafot, that they're excrement and so on, in the alleyways, it's mutar, it's asur. Obviously, it sounds over here that we're talking about a chumrah. So maybe he held it's mutar, but he still didn't do it as a chumrah because that was the chassidut. Or you have to say like the Rashba, that he loved the Torah so much that it would be out of control for other people that were so much involved with the Torah and still was able to control himself not to do something that is asur. We'll maybe come back to this and discuss it. We're mamash leaving this in the middle of a sentence, and it's a very gishmak to see the rest of this. Hanhagot of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Eliezer is a fascinating piece of Gemara which will continue Be'ezrat Hashem in the days to come.
Two questions.